welcome to another edition of The Public Interest. I am Malika Ramsey. Thank you very much for joining us. On today's program, we discuss the hinterland communities. Of course, you know our hinterland communities have been somewhat neglected in the past decades or so. And with me to discuss exactly what's happening in the hinterland communities is leader of the People's National Congress Reform and leader of the opposition, Mr. David Granger. Welcome, sir.
Thank you very much, Malika.
Great to have you, as always. Mr. Granger, it is noted that it seems as though only the opposition, David Granger, and probably a Partnership for National Unity, and of course the People's National Congress Reform, are the only groups or only persons who speak out on what is happening in hinterland communities. We only hear about the bad state of the hinterland communities when something occurs, something bad happens. For example, we had the children falling ill in the Barima. I mean, I'm probably asking you to look into a crystal ball here, but why is it that only these groups seem to be highlighting exactly what's happening in our hinterland communities?
Like a Partnership for National Unity is concerned about the development of the entire nation and all of the peoples in Guyana, and that's why we call ourselves a Partnership for National Unity, because we have a national concern. The PPP traditionally never interacted much with the hinterland. On the other hand, the PNC did, and the PNC has brought this philosophy into APNU. For example, in the Upper Mazaruni, many of the communities there are very strong supporters of the People's National Congress. The four main hinterland regions are the Barima Waini, the Kuyuni Mazaruni, the Pataro Siparuni, that's region 8, and the Rupununi, that's region 9. Of course, parts of region 10 and parts of region 6 could also be described as hinterland. But the PPP has never really cared. Once they got in the government and they were looking for votes, they used the patronage of incumbency, that is the patronage of office, to give out a lot of tokens, a lot of novelties, a lot of gifts, without actually developing the communities. For example, you know, every now and then they give out a few solar panels, or they give out a few ATVs, or they give out some laptops. But these are okay, they're attractive, and you know, they help to win votes, I suppose, but they don't really develop the community. And the PPP does not understand development. It does not understand the need to have an education infrastructure which moves the people out of poverty, out of ignorance. It means they must have a health infrastructure because of the distances. People need to be able to be taken to hospitals quickly. You need to have physical infrastructure, for example, in the entire Rupununi. As I've said on this program before, a region which is about the size of Costa Rica, a country, a republic in Central America, does not even have a proper highway running from north to south. So for all of these reasons, the PPP should be given a failure mark for its attitude, its approach to hinterland development. And we must understand that the hinterland, particularly the hinterland west of Essequibo, is the richest part of Guyana. That's where we get our bauxite, we get our manganese, we get our gold, we get our diamonds, we get our timber. That is an area of unsurpassed beauty. Mountains, waterfalls, rivers, tropical vegetation, tropical fauna. And the PPP just focused on some small groups on the coastline, and they felt, you know, in the past, as long as they can get their votes there, they needn't pay attention to the hinterland. And as a result, you know, the hinterland's been neglected. Now there's a gold rush. Now that people are rushing in, you see the problem. You see bridges being broken down, you see accidents, you see banditry, and the PPP just doesn't know what to do. It seems as if it's being caught by surprise because it never paid attention to this important part of Guyana. We did.
What will it take, or I should say, if given a chance, what would APNU do to develop those great, rich natural resources in the hinterland community so that the people of those communities can benefit?
Well, the first thing we do is look at the needs of the people themselves, and we will focus on poverty alleviation, because too many of our indigenous people are too poor. to actually get a good start in life for the children, and it's a cycle. Once the families are poor, it means the children will probably be deprived, they won't get to school, and that starts a cycle of deprivation. I think the first thing to pay attention to is poverty alleviation. But apart from that, we need to get the education right. Now, you would be surprised that when you look at the results, for example, the National Grade 6 Assessment Test, the highest scoring child in the entire Potaro-Siperuni region, I think got about 468. Is that like over 80 points below the highest scoring child in the country as a whole? And it means that not a single child in the entire region would qualify to go to one of the top 10 secondary schools in the country. Something is bound to be wrong. And when you look at other areas of performance, we find that over half of the children fail all 4 subjects. They fail, by a wide margin. So it means that the educational preparation of our youngsters in the hinterland is at fault. And this has a knock-on effect on employment, because when people drop out of school, it is very difficult for them to get gainful employment. Some of them can't go back to the land because they feel that they're entitled to better, and they cannot get jobs with the education that they have. So the education they were given is not appropriate to the traditional culture, the traditional agriculture, and it is not sufficient to take them into the modern the Guyanese economy. They can't come down to Georgetown and look for jobs. You have to create employment in those very areas. And the government is not creating jobs. The government talks about the growth in the GDP. Whether or not that is true is another matter, but the point is, it is jobless growth. You are not getting jobs for young people. So I think I would say that my priorities would be, or APNU's priorities would be, poverty alleviation. We have to get more people out of poverty. We have to stabilize the education system at both primary and secondary levels and make it more appropriate to the conditions in the hinterland. And thirdly, we have to provide jobs for young people.
Are you confident you can do those things using the resources there that are already in the hinterland? I mean, it's probably coming back to some things you would have said, but can you use the resources of those communities to alleviate poverty and to better the education system?
Oh, definitely. I think the most important thing is to recognize the nature of hinterland development. Largely, many of the indigenous people are anchored to the subsistence economy, but we can help to raise them out of poverty by providing proper markets. And to get to the markets, they have to get proper roads. Now, let's say you produce peanuts or cassava, whatever you produce. It is almost useless. I mean, of course, they need stuff for their their household consumption. But if you cannot get your produce to the market, it means that you'll be marginalized, you'll be kept out of the mainstream economy. You need money to get other things, a motorcycle, gasoline. But if you cannot even sell your produce, you are going to face difficulties. So I would say that in terms of poverty alleviation, you need to ensure that the infrastructure is there so that our indigenous people could get their produce to the markets, and they will perform because they've done it before, but they've been let down because this administration discontinued something called the old Guyana Marketing Corporation, which used to take produce from the farmers, so that the farmers were guaranteed a market, and that has collapsed now. So sometimes people produce pumpkins or watermelon or whatever it is, but they can't get it to the market. Many of the farmers in some areas are linked to what I would call the Coriol economy. People don't like the expression, but the basic means of transportation in some areas in the hinterland, particularly in the Barima Waini region and the Kuyuni Mazuruni region, is by boat. There are no roads. And you can't get a canter truck and take your goods to the market. You have to go by Coriol. And gasoline at somewhere like Cameron, it's about $2,800 a gallon. So you cannot just give a person an engine because he or she might be living in an area where there is very little or no access at all to gasoline. Things like that. Life is very, very tough in Hinterland. Things are very expensive. Distances are great. People are poor. So in order to get hinterland development going again, we need to pay attention to the infrastructure. I am confident that once farmers can get their goods to the market, they will produce. Once the markets are functioning effectively, we can have a greater level of prosperity, and a lot of the hinterland dwellers will be lifted out of poverty. Once that happens, you start to see the virtuous cycle. Households will be better equipped so that children can go to school, they can get their school books, they can learn and lift themselves out of poverty and produce a more modern economy. Right now, the prospects for employment for a lot of our indigenous people, some of the youngsters go into the gold fields, or they try to get a job in the army or the police, and some of the girls become nurses or teachers, and sometimes they find it very difficult to get jobs in Guyana. They go overseas, not overseas, they cross the border to Brazil, and many people with CSEC qualifications are forced to do menial jobs as farmhands and waitresses in restaurants and so on. It's a real shame.
I'm constantly told that Guyana was once termed or dubbed the breadbasket of the Caribbean. Of course, that's probably, that would have been probably before I was born. So are you saying that you do believe that with hinterland development, Guyana can return to that status?
I don't like the term because it's become something of a cliche,
Okay.
In which people just talk about the breadbasket of the Caribbean. To start with, the Caribbean is a vast area, and there are many countries that produce much more than the Caribbean, much more than Guyana, countries like Cuba, Dominican Republic, Puerto Rico. So it is not as easy as that. Most people mean the Anglophone Caribbean when they're speaking about what they call the Caribbean, that is the former British West Indies, Jamaica, Barbados, Belize, Bahamas, and so on. Even so, these countries are very sophisticated, and they have large tourism sectors, and they demand quality products and consistent production. If you're producing rice, they don't want broken grains. If you're producing papaws or avocado pears, they mustn't be touched. They mustn't have blemishes. They must be of a certain size. So the markets are very sophisticated, and Guyana is a long way from producing goods to that standard. Okay. There are places in the Eastern Caribbean which are readily accessible by Guyanese producers, but all of the Caribbean markets now, whether or not they're Anglophone Caribbean, are very sophisticated, and they look at quality products, the conditions under which the products were grown and packaged, and they look for regularity. If you have a hotel and you require 1,000 kilos of papaw every week, they don't want to hear, we only have 300 kilos this week. Because they've got to serve the meals to the customers, and after a while, Guyana will be pushed out of the market. So I don't like to use the expression. Okay. We can do better.
All right. Earlier you spoke about the National Grade 6 assessment and the fact that the student, I think you said, is in Pataro Siparuni. They got 80 below the mark of the average child, probably on the coast.
Not average, the best.
The best. Okay, yes. 80 below the best student, probably on the coast. Do you not believe that grade is a reflection of probably the teachers in the hinterland community, and by domino effect, a reflection of what the Ministry of Education is actually doing?
I would not like to blame the teachers.
Okay.
It is largely an organizational matter at the level of the ministry to ensure that there are sufficient teachers and the teachers are sufficiently trained. But I have been to Hinterland schools myself, and I would like to feel that there needs to be much more careful attention to the actual construction of the schools, the accommodation that is provided, the quality furniture, ventilation, the other amenities. For example, we all remember the child at Maruka in the Barima-Wainee region who drowned in his toilet. And then we remember the photograph of the children carrying logs in the Putaro-Siparuni region. So I wouldn't want to blame the teachers. There are obviously other problems, infrastructural problems, that the ministry must put right. Yes, we need to have enough teachers and teachers of quality, but we need to get the infrastructure right as well. Now, there are other problems in the educational sector in the hinterland. One of the most grave, of course, is the distances which children have to cover to get to school. And that is the reason why, of course, the hinterland has got more what you can call boarding schools, more dormitories than anywhere else, because I know in some areas in the Barima-Wainee region where children have to paddle a canoe 1 or 2 hours to get to school. So after doing that, they really can't be focused on their meals. They've got to paddle another hour to get back home. So children living some distance away from the schools are allowed to stay in dormitories. But even those dormitories have run into problems, because once a child living in a dormitory, it means that he or she has to get 3 meals a day. And that is another issue, providing quality meals. And then, of course, their children are children, especially teenagers. They get up to all sorts of things when the lights go out. And you need proper supervision, you need proper discipline. And then in some areas, there's been overcrowding. I remember at Waramadan a few years ago, there was a fire which killed several, I think 3 or 4 girls were killed in the fire. So these dormitories have problems, and we have to look at the whole education system. Because of the vast distances, and I think people in Georgetown don't appreciate how vast this country is. The Barima-Wainee region alone, for example, is 4 times the size of Trinidad. 4 times the size of Trinidad and Tobago. That's what we're talking about. The Cuyuni-Mazaruni region is bigger than the Netherlands. The Rupununi is bigger than Costa Rica. These are huge distances, and to expect children to go to school, it's not a matter of giving them a bicycle. They have to have completely different logistical and administrative regime. So when we speak about education, it is particularly problematic, and the government has got to be more serious about expenditure, about infrastructure, and about staffing of the schools, so we won't have any of these scandals that we've had over the last decade.
Now, this is not necessarily my personal opinion, but there is the notion out there that, look, they're from the hinterland, they're Amerindians. You spoke about the child having to paddle maybe an hour or 2 to get to school every day. The notion is that, look, that's their way of life, they're accustomed to it. So I'm going to ask now, as someone who constantly visits the hinterland community, what are the people saying to David Granger and APNU? Are they comfortable with that, or do they want betterment?
I do believe they want better, and we have pointed the way. In fact, if you look at the hinterland development as a whole, every single area is problematic. And if we start from governance, the regional system, for example, when you look at what happened at Barima-Wainee between January and April this year with the health crisis, the region should have been so strong as to take control from the moment of the outbreak. Take control of the situation, provide medical teams, water teams, security teams, bring all of the elements together There are about half a dozen ministries involved in that crisis. The Ministry of Armament Affairs, the Ministry of Education, because the school children had to be better informed. The Ministry of Housing and Water, the Ministry of Health, the Ministry of Home Affairs also. So you needed a strong regional chairman who could have brought all of these services together and attack the problem. If he's weak or if he's not empowered, well then everything has to happen from Georgetown. And that's the problem. Georgetown was slow to respond, so children were dying, people were falling ill. Everybody was at the airport waiting for they did not have the resources to respond. So governance is a problem. As I said before, education is a problem, infrastructure is a problem. You must be able to get to some of these places in the hinterland without having to go on a plane. You must be able to drive from place to place. If I want to go to Roscoe, I don't get on a plane. But in the hinterland, you can be in some places in Region 8, you can't get to the destination unless you get to a plane because the infrastructure is so poorly developed. So I would say yes, the residents of the hinterland are looking to APNU because we have held out the promise of real development. This is not a matter of sharing out a few tokens, a few toys. It is a matter of providing development where it is needed, making the people richer, providing roads and bridges, allowing people to move around more freely, get their products to market, building better schools, and giving children a break in life. We are the only party that has painted that sort of picture of grassroots development for our indigenous people.
Do you believe that our indigenous peoples living in our hinterland communities will anytime soon come to or be able to have the courage to say to government or PPP officials, look, we don't want your handouts. This is not what we want. We're not accepting. We want development. Do you believe that they'll ever get that courage to do that?
Well, I don't think it's a matter of courage. I think they've done so. Okay. It's a matter of organization, and a Partnership for National Unity has provided that organization in the form of the coalition that we funded, and there's a strong party called the Guyana Action Party, which largely represents indigenous people, and they're not afraid to speak out. They're very articulate. They've been to these communities, and they speak out. But the government, because of its control of the media, has been able to suppress their voices. I'm convinced of that. The government just doesn't publish bad news. It's just like the Brima Waini from the 1st of April, they just stopped publishing news about the health crisis. The result is that the indigenous people have not had their grievances articulated to the general public. And it is not until you have something like the photograph of the children carrying logs that there's a response. But the government knew that it was happening, had to know it was happening, because it has headmistresses, it has regional administrators, and that region it's under the Alliance for Change, but the REOs are appointed by the PPP. So a lot could be done, but it needs a different approach to governance, a different approach to organization. If the PPP was prepared to share and genuinely allow the voices of the indigenous people to be heard, I think many of these problems could be alleviated, could be removed, could be eradicated. But it is not allowing the people to speak out. You see, picture yourself in the Upper Mazaruni. There's no newspaper, there's no television, there's no internet, there's no radio, there's no way of finding out what is happening on a day-to-day basis in the rest of the country. And there's no way of getting your message out. For example, I made mention of the fact that every time one of our MPs comes out from the Upper Mazaruni, it costs about $600 US. And people must understand we can't go on running the country like that. We have to provide proper roads. She must be able to get into a car or a minibus One of these days, it wouldn't happen in your lifetime. Must be able to get into a car and drive to Cameron, drive to Bartica, drive to Georgetown. But we can't continue to try to develop this country with aircraft. We have to develop this country with good roads and bridges and railways. So we need to get the administration to look at a different paradigm for national development. And I think it can be done.
Do they have the human and probably financial resources to actually develop the hinterland communities? I mean, government, that is.
Well, it's a question of can we afford not to develop those communities? The hinterland is the richest part of this country. It produces our gold, it produces our timber, it produces our diamonds, it produces our manganese when it comes on stream. And to some extent, you can say it produces some bauxite as well. We have to find the money. Otherwise, the hinterland will remain an underdeveloped zone. Infrastructure, in the view of a Partnership for National Unity, is an investment. It's not a liability. It's not just money gone wasted. It's an investment. You build a road, you build a bridge, you put a toll on it. You put a toll on the bridge. And people want to use the road, they pay so much, $100, and it pays for itself. But at the end of the day, the users have a road. For example, there's a flood in Rupununi. How will we get food? How will we get relief? If we had a road, people can drive through. But if there's no road, they have to fly. And you can only take a limited amount of supplies on board an airplane. Whereas if you had a road, you can send a convoy of trucks. Tons and tons of stuff. So, from any point of view, infrastructure, particularly the physical infrastructure such as roads and bridges, highways, could be regarded as an investment. And that is the way Guyana will be developed. It's just like, we see the movies of America, how the West was won. Railways, communications. You don't just stay on the East and say, oh, we'll never be able to afford it. You put a railway. So now you can stay in New York, you can stay in Washington, and get on the road, get on trains, and connect up with California on the West Coast. And that's the way to go. Australia had to be developed too. All countries develop by transport. But we seem to feel that by treating transport as a gift that we give to our loyal constituents and deny it to people who we feel are linked to the other political parties is a politically intelligent way to develop the country. I don't think so. There are many areas where roads are needed for economic purposes to get the goods to the market. And the government feels that when elections are coming around, they come into their favorite villages and just plaster the road, and everybody says, oh, great, what a good government we have. But the roads are really needed in the hinterland. A few days ago, a team from APNU and the AFC went to the Milo Falls. A miner can't even get going because the road hasn't been done. And the road is costing millions upon millions of dollars. And that is literally the first step. And what our people saw was a great disappointment. So that is just a road to go to the site of the hydropower. You can imagine people in the day-to-day activities without roads. And that is what is pushing up the cost of living in the hinterland. And that is what is preventing farmers from getting their products to market.
In the final moments of this broadcast, sir, I know this is not the first time you have been speaking out on, the state of the hinterland communities. Do you believe that, because the government seems to be ignoring you so far, yourself and the APNU, regarding the hinterland communities, do you believe that they will continue to ignore you even after this broadcast and after other motions and sentiments regarding the hinterland communities?
Well, I expect the government to behave as it's behaved over the last 20 years. That is why we have to use our voting power in the National Assembly. that is APNU and AFC together, to bring pressure to bear on the administration. In a way, I don't care if they ignore me, but I think the message has resonated with the people, and we look forward to the people in the various regions using their voices to tell the government, hey, this way of running the region, running the country is not working. We have serious problems in Region 8. With the REO, we have problems throughout the country, as I said, in the Burima-Waini region, the response to that crisis. So I don't have any high hopes of the PPP, but what I do hope is that the people themselves can get organized and can demand better, and I think better will come because APNU will give them the type of support that they need in the National Assembly.
Thank you very much, sir. Leader of the People's National Congress Reform and Leader of the Opposition, Brigadier the Honorable David Granger. This has been another edition of The Public Interest. I am Malika Ramsey. Thanks for watching.